Hi everyone, I want to come on today and talk to you about frustration because, as any of you know, I'm Johnny Bevan. I'm the police burnout coach, and I'm still a serving police officer at the moment. I work on the child protection unit, and if you're a police officer, you will be no stranger to frustration. Maybe it's from the organization, the amount of time that you have to do things, the lack of resources. The list is endless, isn't it? And we often feel this sense of frustration, and it can really, well, it can just drive us to insanity, can't it? With systems not working and that. So I want to talk to you about how to deal with frustration, sort of talk a bit about where it comes from, and just give you some tools that could help you. The first thing I want to say is frustration is perfectly normal. So when I first got to know this work, because I'm a life coach, and I was like started to understand how my feelings were created by my thinking and not my circumstance, I used to think that I shouldn't feel them. But actually, this is not correct, because so much of our thinking is unconscious. We are going to feel these emotions, but we just need to learn to understand them and not resist them. Because a lot of the time, what we do is we resist them, which looks like pushing them down. We react to them, which is like shouting and yelling and complaining, or we try and avoid them. And so we eat them away, we drink them away, we procrastinate, we look at our phones and all of that. But frustration is no different than any other emotion. Doesn't mean anything's gone wrong with you. But often what we have is we don't like the feeling of frustration. So we then have frustration about the frustration. And then it builds and builds, and we become very ineffective in that moment. And what I see a lot of is someone may have frustration about like a system and it might be slow, or we use a crime recording system called Niche, and we're using it and we're getting all we're getting really frustrated with it because we think it's holding us up. But then we complain and we moan about it, and we procrastinate and we delay, we put off doing things, we put off doing our case files and all things like that. And then it ends up that self-fulfilling prophecy that, we've wasted more time and we're not as productive. So, but when we deal with this frustration, not feel it, but when we deal with it and understand where it comes from, then we can get a handle on it. Okay. And frustration is something I used to deal with a lot, and well, not deal with, I used to respond to a lot, and I used to get very angry, and I've got so angry before in the past. I've burst blood vessels in my eye. I've lost my voice where I shouted so much. And what I realized was how I was responding became the habit. And so I learned to break that habit through the coaching. And this is why I find coaching so effective, because there's lots of other things out there that work as well. And I'm not poo-pooing any of those. I think everything's got its place. But for me, things like mindfulness, meditation, and sort of these relaxation techniques, or things we rely on, like exercise, yoga outside the job, that doesn't help us in the moment. But when I'm dealing with a prisoner and I'm up against the custody clock, I can't go and meditate. I can't go down to the gym. I know some people that have gone and got taken the frustration out of the punch bag, but then that heightens them even more. It's not taking the frustration out. I don't think. And for me, it's like you're not. It's like it's like putting a plaster on the wound. It's like taking an aspirin for a broken arm. Feels better for a moment, but you're not addressing the underlying cause. So the first thing we want to do is accept and understand that frustration doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. We don't want to push it away. And we want to just watch it. This is a key thing, is becoming the watcher of yourself. Because often we'll be frustrated about something, like we think something should be different, or we should have more time. We haven't got enough time. And when we're in frustration, we might waste more time by procrastinating, doing all those things and complaining and moaning. And we don't really change anything until we watch it and become aware of it. So first of all, we want to accept it, and then we just want to watch it and allow it. And this is, I think, for me, with frustration, allowing frustration to be there is one of the hardest things, because it feels so urgent. Like you want to do something, you want to shout, you want to blame. And blaming, I want to say a word on blaming. Blaming is one of the key symptoms that you're not willing to feel an emotion, because what you're doing, you're blaming something because you just can't stand to be with this emotion. So that can be, don't beat yourself up for it, just have it as an awareness that actually that could be an indication that you're not wanting to feel this emotion. And what I do when I say about watching and allowing them frustration is just recognizing where it is in your body and how it feels. Maybe just stopping just for a moment and going, what can I feel? And you'll probably feel like a real vibration. And what that is, that's the adrenaline in your body. You know, that has been, that adrenaline has been produced. Your brain's predicted some sort of danger and it's got adrenaline. So of course you're going to feel energized and you're going to be sort of shaky. But it's not often that is the problem. The actual sensation of frustration is not the problem. It's how we respond to it. So when I become frustrated, what I do is I would become very unfocused. I would flip from one job to the other. I'd moan, I'd complain, I'd procrastinate, and all of it would compound the problem and make it worse. But when you learn to allow it and watch it and feel it in your body, you allow that emotion to take its natural course. Now, if you find in those moments that you find it really hard to come out of your head and go into your body, because it can be, your brain can just be spinning. One of the things I've learned recently, which is really helpful, is a physiological, I find it very hard to say it, physiological sigh. And what that is, that offloads the carbon dioxide. If you want to know more about it, listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast. He talks about it a lot. But basically what you're doing is you're taking in two breaths and letting through the nose and exhaling out through the mouth for a long one. And the exhale has got to be longer than the inhale. He explains, I won't go into all that, but he explains exactly why that is. But it can just quieten you down in that moment. It's really good sort of technique. So it's literally like you take a breath, I go, and what that does is that gets rid of the carbon dioxide that's building up, and it's a direct link to what you call your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. It gets you out of that fight or flight. So I like to use that sometimes, just do 2 or 3 rounds of that just to calm myself down. And then I just notice that frustration. Because once you notice it, what you can do is you can then start noticing where that comes from. And our feelings always come from our thoughts. We think it comes from the situation we're in, but if it did, everyone in that same situation would feel that frustration. So it's always our thinking. If we didn't have a thought about it, we wouldn't have this frustration. And when we learn to allow it, what is we don't then fear it. We don't add more negativity onto this feeling of frustration. And then what we can do is we can start changing our perspective. We can start shifting our perspective. But we can't really do this until we've allowed it. This is what I find. But once we've done that, we don't want to sort of trick ourselves and lie to ourselves, but we can just start considering other perspectives. So if you're in, say you're dealing with a prisoner and you haven't got long on the custody clock, something like that, you might just ask yourself, what am I going to make this mean in 5 years' time? What am I going to make this mean tomorrow? And what that does is that opens up your focus, because when we're in a state of frustration, that our brain gets very focused on the problem. It narrows our focus. But when we start asking these other questions, we start opening up our focus and realizing actually maybe this isn't as bad as it all seems. And then we can go to that future self, this person sort of 5 years' time, go, what would they tell me about this now? And then what that can do is when that can give you new thoughts to think in this moment. And what you'll find is you'll have a shift in how you feel. And then really pay attention to this, because if you've got that shift in how you feel and you've changed how you feel in this moment and your circumstance hasn't changed, how can it be your circumstance that is responsible for that feeling? Well, it's not, because you've just changed your perspective of it, and your perspective, you're just changing your thoughts, you've just changed your focus, and suddenly you've generated a new feeling. And then you can get some awareness around why you feel that frustration. And for me, this is really important, because what I find is frustration and anger is normally protecting me from some other vulnerable emotion. And we go, especially us men, we go to frustration and anger because it's easier. We can respond to it. We can shout, we can yell. Whereas what I find is often is it's underlying some sort of fear. So I had it once when I was staying on and I got really frustrated because I had a case file to do. We had a prisoner on remand and I felt like I was just left there on my own. I got really frustrated and angry. Actually, how I felt was I felt really nervous, anxious, and scared because I feared getting it wrong. I feared making mistakes. I feared other people's opinions. But if I didn't allow that frustration to be there, I would have never got awareness around that and found that. So actually, that was the gateway into what was really going on for me. And then I was able to work on that. So start looking and thinking about so asking yourself, what's the real problem here? What am I really worried about? What's the worst case scenario? And you can realize actually that frustration is trying to protect you from something that's probably not benefiting you. So you can just allow it. So you want to allow it, you want to start shifting that perspective. And then what you can do is after the fact, you can start looking and going, how do you want to respond in these situations? So if that frustration is making you come home and not being able to switch off and being really stressed, you can then think, actually, how do I want to respond in those situations? How would how would a calm person respond to that? And you can start actually practicing being that version of yourself. And that may sound stupid to a lot of you, but I can assure you, if you practice being the person ahead of time, you will become that person. And then what you want to do is start thinking, what would someone in that situation that was calm, what would they be thinking about this? How would they be feeling? Probably calm if they're a calm person. And what would they do? How would they act? And what result would that give them? And then you can start practicing those new beliefs, because it's our fears and our beliefs that drive us to this frustration, I find, especially in our job. Like for me, I always felt frustration when I was up against any time limit. So I worked on that and I found that actually it wasn't the time that was the problem. It's because I felt anxious because I thought I was going to miss something. So I didn't work on the time that was available to me. I worked on that belief that thought I'm going to miss something. And then as soon as I got awareness around that and realized that when I thought that I was more likely to miss something, I suddenly started changing. I cast the light of awareness on it. And then I started thinking new things, and it's really changed me. Now, when I'm up against a time limit, I'm like, let's get this done in the time we got available. And I don't waste so much time. Because what I find is when I was in a state of frustration, when I was against tight timescales, I would waste more time. So I was actually adding to the problem that I was complaining about. And I find when we're frustrated, we focus on a lot of things that aren't in our control. Whereas when we can sort of dial it back, then we can focus on things that are under our influence, and then we're more likely to have this sense of control. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to check, because I wrote some stuff down for you guys on frustration, and I want to just check that I haven't missed any of it. Yeah, the only thing is, I'd say, which I think the only thing I sort of missed out was, don't fight it. If you feel frustrated, if you think you shouldn't be frustrated, you don't want to, you add another layer of negativity, so you want to release that. But if you go up against it and try and push it, in that moment, that brain really thinks there's a problem. It's actually looking out for you, it's trying to protect you. So don't go up against it, just allow it. And what I like to say to people is surrender to it. This isn't just give in, oh, that's it, but just let it in and just notice it and watch it. And if you want some tips on watching it, get in touch. Put some comments down below. But some tips I would give you now is to notice where it is in your body. Just notice where it is. Focus. I find it useful. Focus on my heartbeat and just notice what's going on in the body and come out of the head. Give it a color. Ask yourself, does it move? How fast is it? What texture is it? Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it smooth? Is it spiky? What temperature is it? Is it hot? Is it cold? Does it move? And you watch it, and what you'll find is what this does, it sounds strange, but you're actually allowing this emotion to process through your body. Because what we do is we feel the frustration, we don't want to feel it, and we lock it in, and then we have more thoughts, because the thought creates the feeling, but then when we have that feeling in our body, we then have more corresponding thoughts, and the frustration builds. And what you may well notice is, which I notice, if I feel frustration, say like I've been frustrated at work, and then so I've had this frustrated thinking, which has caused this feeling, I then go home and I'm a lot less patient because that frustration is still in me. And so I'm and then I might respond badly to, say, my kids or my wife. And then I have a lot of guilt and stuff about that. But when we learn to process it and allow it, then we can switch that all off. And the other thing is I got down here is don't beat yourself up. So if you do respond to it, I had it today where I had a situation and I responded. I sort of said something to my wife and I realized that's because I'm not dealing with my frustration. But I was able to tell her that. So you're able to apologize more and actually take responsibility and go, actually, I'm just dealing with something at the moment. And because what I find is these emotions, it doesn't matter that we respond to them, but if we use that as a sign of we've reached our emotional edge, then we can push that edge further and further up. Because our sort of limits are based on what we're willing to feel. And we know when we meet that edge because we respond to it. We might shout, we might complain, we might start moaning, complaining. But then we cast the light of awareness on it. We find out, as we've discussed, why we feel frustrated, what's underlying that. And then we push that up because then in those situations, we become more resilient because we can notice it when it comes up and not react to it. And that's how we create resilience. But we will meet that edge again. We may be in another situation where maybe there's a couple of things going on and we meet it again and we respond. Don't beat yourself up. It's fine. It's fine. It's just think of it as part of the process. Then go, right, what's going on here? This is just a sign that there's work to be done. And there will always be work to be done. Okay. Yeah. So that is everything I got for you. And if you find you are someone this, you are frustrated, quick to anger, you find you're in that sort of irritated state quite a lot, get in touch because it could be a sign that you're in burnout. It's one of the symptoms of burnout is that quick to anger. You feel that overwork, overwhelmed, and it can lead to that physical and mental exhaustion. But when you release all of this, what happens is you get your energy back. You get increased energy levels, which is very different from going and having a coffee to perk you up. You have this inner energy, which will drive you on, and you'll be able to process these frustrations, which will help you switch off, feel more energized. So you're not, working these long hours, staying on, and then not being able to switch off on your rest days and just spending your rest days just absolutely knackered. So if you want help with that, get in touch. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments below, and I'd love to answer them. That's all I got for you today, and I will speak to you soon. Bye-bye.